It is fascinating to me, not necessarily which stories the mainstream media chooses to cover. It is fascinating to me those stories that the mainstream media chooses not to cover. You can tell as much about the bias of the mainstream media, and I'm talking about, if you want me to be more specific, obviously, hashtag never CNN. I call them hashtag never CNN because you should never watch CNN. Do not watch this garbage network. It's a garbage network full of garbage people spewing garbage. I will watch so you don't have to. It's called an occupational hazard. They pay me to do these things. Let me do them for you. Similarly, CBS, ABC, NBC, the alphabet soups, MSNBC, of course. I don't even blame MSNBC. A shark's going to be a shark. New York Times, Washington Post, etc., etc., etc. They are now biased in plain sight. They do not attempt to hide it. They do not mind being biased. They are subjective. They admit their subjectivity on a regular basis. But you can tell as much about what they do not cover, or rather, back it up, Murphy. You can tell as much about their bias in what they do not cover as you can in what they do. And right now, as impactful as Helene has been, impactful as Milton will be. And I understand that that is the central focus right now. We need to save people's lives. Sadly, the federal government is not coming to help. One of the more difficult things to wrap your head around is this idea that we have placed trust in the wrong people. We have placed trust in the wrong organizations. We have created an entity and put trust in an entity that by its very existence cannot fulfill its obligations. It is too slow. It is too regulated. It is too cumbersome. It cannot do what is necessary to get done to save lives in the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster of this sort. And we have to get our heads around that. And we have to have a conversation after the immediate cleanup is done, after the bodies are buried, after people's lives are made as best they can be normal again. We have to get to a conclusion where we have a conversation about the ridiculous inefficiency of FEMA. And it's not just that they aren't doing their jobs anymore. And I'm not, and by the way, let's be real plain about this. I'm not blaming any individual, and you shouldn't either. If you see a person that works for FEMA, you should not assume that that's a bad person. That's wrong. Just as wrong as if someone sees you in a Trump hat, so don't assume that these are bad people. It's the organization that is rotten. It is the organization that cannot be fixed. It is the structure and nature of the existence of the organization that is going to create chaos in times where we need solutions to problems, immediate problems. The only thing that FEMA brings with them is a checkbook. That's the only thing. And that money is borrowed against the future of the United States of America, as I said yesterday. It's not even borrowed against our children or our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren. We're never paying any of this money back. Y'all need to get over yourselves. We just need to decide how much we want to spend now, how much we want to party now, based on the fact that the more partying that we do with fake money, the more quickly we bring about the demise of the United States of America. Are y'all following me? The more money we spend that we don't actually have, the quicker we're bringing about the end of America. And FEMA is a great example of that. The only thing they bring with them is fake money. Oh, they'll say they bring tools and we have all of those things. We have all of those things. Sadly, too much of our money goes into Washington, D.C., that we would and could have more of those things. But all of that to say, these mainstream media networks, they're not only are they refusing to talk about the inability for FEMA to do the job that it was designed to do, they are lying to the American people when it comes to how they were spending their money a year ago. The mainstream media has decided that they are going to tote the water on a lie promoted by the Biden-Harris administration. And it is a provable lie. The Biden-Harris administration took money from the Department of Homeland Security, and more specifically, they took money from the FEMA division, the Federal Emergency Management Agency division of the Department of Homeland Security, and they spent that money on illegal aliens. That is a fact. It happened. And I have the receipts, and I'm going over it with you today. Yet yesterday in the White House briefing room, Karine Jean-Pierre just stood there and talked Peter Doocy down to the point where she said, you even asking about this is misinformation. How the hell is that the case? The White House, the executive branch of government, is now telling a member of the press that they can't ask a question because it's misinformation. And those same White House officials have also said in other statements and in other interviews that misinformation should be a punishable offense. So if you put two and two together, we are at a time in American history, ladies and gentlemen, that has the potential to be far more damaging and disastrous than Hurricane Helene. Far more damaging and disastrous than Hurricane Milton. Connect the dots, folks. You have Tim Walz and Kamala Harris saying that misinformation / hate speech should be punishable by jail time. You had Hillary Clinton out on the stump saying that misinformation and hate speech should be punishable by jail time. You have the press secretary of the White House telling a reporter for Fox News, one of the big four news organizations in the United States of America, that the very asking of a question is misinformation, something that they have previously said should be punishable by jail. And all of it is based on covering up a lie. And ABC is covering it up. I watched a David Muir. I almost puked in my mouth. Donald Trump repeating false information about the redirecting of funds away from Hurricane Helene. How the hell do you people sleep at night? They know what they're saying isn't true. They're playing with numbers. They're playing with buckets of money. Here's what they do. They take a bunch of money. Imagine... Let me see if I can get through this analogy. Let me see if this analogy makes sense. Bell K, Ken Weaver in the newsroom. Bell K behind the glass, making sure that everything that comes out of our speaker sounds as good as possible. Hello, gentlemen. By the way, I'm on a rant already. I'm sorry.
Hello.
Good afternoon, boys. Yes.
Rant away, sir.
Mr. Weaver. All right, so let's see if this analogy makes sense to you guys. So you have a pool, like a backyard pool, an in-ground pool, and it is empty. And I fill that pool with water from my hose. And then I take a clear plexiglass divider and I put a divider down the middle of that pool where I separate the shallow end and the deep end of the pool. And then I take money from the shallow end. I take a bucket, I take a bucket of water from the shallow end, and then I take a bucket of water from the deep end, and I set it on the side of the pool. Is that water coming from the same place?
Yes.
The federal government says no. That money did not come from the same place. That's the game that they're playing.
A shell game.
It's a shell game, Ken. So when they tell you, oh no, this money wasn't redirected from FEMA, that's the game they're playing. And they play it one way or the other depending on how they want to play it. So they'll take the divider out when it's necessary and wash that money together so you don't know where it's coming from. They do this all the time with political action committees in politics, by the way. I have audio of Karine Jean-Pierre, the same lying you-know-what that stood on a stage yesterday and dressed Peter Doocy down for even suggesting that any money from the Federal Emergency Management Agency was spent on illegal aliens. I have her saying that the Federal Emergency Management Agency would be spending money on illegal aliens. 2 years ago. So while in the grand scheme of things, they'll just print more money, and it's what they do, in the grand scheme of things, the design is to get everybody to shut up about the inefficiency of FEMA, and they're trying to bully you to do that, victims to do that. Just know that they're lying to you. Now, the real scandal that exists regarding Hurricane Helene is this. And I looked at my calendar earlier today. We are now at 12 days. Hurricane Helene made landfall on September 26th. By September 27th, Hurricane Helene had made it to North Carolina. By September 28th, everyone from Valdosta and Statesboro, Georgia, all up along that corridor of Georgia into my hometown of Thomson, Georgia, no P in Thomson, Thomson, Augusta, and the surrounding areas. The hurricane then took a slight left turn and moved into North Carolina, popping Asheville, popping Fairview, popping all of those areas that we've talked about, popping Newport in Tennessee and other areas in Cocke County. And by the daybreak of September 28th, which was a Saturday, it became obvious what we were dealing with. Bell, would you care to guess when Joe Biden mobilized the National Guard, the United States military, and the Federal Emergency Management? Federal Emergency Management Agency had pre-staged. Would you care to guess? We became fully aware on that Saturday, September 28th. You know when it was?
Well, let's see. I think Joe never did it because he was busy eating ice cream.
But for the purposes of my conversation.
But somebody in his cabinet, probably, what was it? I'm gonna take an educated guess of the 30th.
It was October 2nd.
Oh, I gave him too much credit.
Even if I give them September 28th, that Saturday, to recognize the totality of what happened, the devastation descended upon the Southeast on September 27th, that Friday. We were on air. We did not fully understand. We thought it was a good thing that it was such a fast mover. Remember that? We thought, this is going to be great for the Florida coast. This is going to be great for South Georgia. Because if that thing had sat there and dumped rain, oh boy, that would be bad. Well, what it did, it moved through Georgia, devastating things in its wake. And it got to North Carolina, and then it just sat there and dumped water in North Carolina, in those hills, in those valleys, in that terrain that had not seen anything like it in human existence, it seems to us. And the federal government and the Joe Biden administration and Kamala Harris, they sat there on September 28th and September 29th and September 30th and October 1st, 4 days. 4 days. On October 2nd, Joe Biden authorized the mobilization of the United States military and the National Guard. On October 3rd, that mobilization of 500 soldiers happened. On October 5th, there was another mobilization of 500 more soldiers. September 28th, September 29th, September 30th, October 1st. 4 days. 4 days of people dying. 4 days of people struggling. 4 days of neighbors desperate to help neighbors. I have zero interest in being talked down to by this administration. Zero. And the same mainstream media that ran George W. Bush through hell and back in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the same mainstream media that called George W. Bush everything but a child of God. They said he was racist. They said he didn't care if black people were dead. The same mainstream media that gave him hell for a 3-day gap in time, they choose to ignore 4 days. 4 days of the White House doing nothing. 4 days of Kamala Harris campaigning in Nevada. Even today. She's got a big-time important meeting with Howard Stern and The View. You cannot hate the mainstream media enough. They don't give one damn about you. They've got an election to win.